What is going on, everyone, and welcome back to the Sports Talk on Tap podcast. We're here. You can find daily videos mainly covering Minnesota sports, but the NFL and NBA, but also sprinkling on some NHL and MLB along the way. But in today's episode, got a couple different topics we'll dive into. One of them for the NFL is three sleepers that I have for this upcoming season. Teams that is, teams that may be a sleeper Super Bowl contender, sleeper team just to exceed their win total, maybe sneak into a wild card we don't expect. So we have that on today's schedule, and also a quick Game 3 preview with Oklahoma City Thunder and Indiana Pacers tonight. Series tied 1-1, heading back to Indiana. And then also just along with the NFL, the three sleeper teams, just a quick couple notes about OTAs and some holdouts that we should talk about, specifically with one team that I kind of want to kind of solely focus on. But yeah, with that being said, it's going to be pretty simple. So for the three sleeper teams, the first team I want to start off with is my hometown team. Grew up rooting for them before I eventually became a diehard Minnesota Vikings fan. Team local in my area, big passionate, maybe the best franchise known in the NFL, and that is the New England Patriots. I love what the Patriots did this offseason. They were aggressive. They fired Gerard Mayo, which I think was the right move, even though I think they did him a little bit wrong. And he was kind of like, the scapegoat one-year head coach was already kind of planned after Bill Belichick to just be the incumbent, even though he maybe wasn't ready. And it just was an ugly season. But with that being said, how quickly a year can turn around, I really like them a lot heading into this year. Even though I'm not a Patriots fan anymore, it'll be fun to root for them because they got some exciting young talent. And that starts with their quarterback, Drake May. I mean, he's just a dog. Last year, I thought if he was going to play, he was going to be awful. I thought while he had all the talent, the Patriots coaching staff wouldn't be able to coach him up. He didn't have the weapons. He was kind of thrown into the fire early, like I expected after, I believe it was like week 4. He had a game against the Houston Texans, but he showed a lot of promise. And he played at a top 20 QB level. And I would say, I mean, the stats look good, but those things reflect, how much he overcame with, not a great offensive line, little to no weapons, and then competent coaching staff. They did have. He showcased a lot of talent. I'm very excited to see what Drake May has. He proved why he was the top 3 pick, why, the Vikings tried to trade up for him back in last year's draft, why he has all the talent in the world. I'm really excited to see what he has in year 2, and I think this is going to be a big sophomore step up instead of a sophomore slump that we might see with some quarterbacks early on. But with that being said, yeah, but Drake May isn't the only reason why I think this team will be good. I know there's a little bit of drama, but Diggs is still a great, receiver in this league, top 20 receiver. And I know he's coming off that torn ACL and, stuff with, just being kind of a diva a little bit and, the OTAs where he was out partying on the boat. But with that being said, he still has a lot of talent and will still be a great wide receiver 1 for this team. And, I think he'll put up big stats with Drake May, and he'll just be a young mentor like he was for Josh Allen back in Buffalo that helped him take the leap from an okay quarterback. Josh Allen was steadily improving already, but to being an MVP candidate. And while maybe not an MVP candidate for Drake May, certainly an even better 2025 campaign. I'll be excited to see as long as he can get in check. I think Vrabel's the right coach to do that because Vrabel ain't going to tolerate any of that BS, as we know with the Titans, and just as his days as the player. And he kind of fits the Patriots culture. More of Bill Belichick, the Patriot way. So be excited to get him. They also just got some young depth pieces. Douglas, Mac Hollins was great on the Bills last year, made some big time plays. I remember in the AFC Championship game, just a guy that can show up and catch some touchdowns, make those big catches. They drafted Will Campbell to help get protection up front, and they improved in the trenches. You signed Milton Williams, was pretty much everyone's free agent number 1. And while he looked like he was going to agree to terms with Carolina, ends up switching, goes to the Patriots on a mega deal. I mean, one of the best pass rushers. He was second, among 219 defensive interior linemen in pass rush. So he's great. Still not great, a little bit at the running. And while I think it was a slight overpay, it was definitely worth it because free agency, you're pretty much overpaying for everyone just because of how the market is now. And everyone's kind of resetting it. But I'll be excited to see what he can do, and interesting to see, how those stats improve going from a 500 snap count guy in Philly where they were using a full rotation to almost full time, maybe, 800 snaps in New England. So that'll be exciting. They also, Mike Vrabel brought in some of his guys like Harold Landry. That was a great player on the Titans, pass rusher. I'm curious to see what he can do. You still have Christian Gonzalez in the back. That's one of the best, coverage cornerbacks in the game. according to PFF. And then you bring Carlton Davis, another solid cornerback for the Lions, and was solid many years on the Bucs. So overall, this team has a lot of depth. And while I still have some question marks, maybe about the rest of the offensive line, I think Will Campbell will be a stud. I think this defense interior is improving. This defense will be pretty good, especially with Coach Frabes coaching them up. I do like what the Patriots did. I think, they're going to be a good team this year. 8-9 wins could be a sneaky wild card team if everything plays into their hands. Maybe they win some of these even more one-score games and improve to 10-7. So yeah, Patriots. I'm very excited to see them, and I know all my Patriots friends around here are excited for the season to start as well. But with that being said, the next team I have on my list is an NFC West foe, the Seattle Seahawks. I like the Seahawks. Their fan base is great. The uniforms are great. It's kind of not really, you can't really dislike the Seahawks, I feel like, unless, you're in division like the 49ers, then I get it. But with that being said, the Seahawks this offseason made the shocking trade where they sent Geno Smith to Las Vegas to team up with Pete Carroll. And then pretty quickly, everyone kind of knew they were going to go after Sam Darnold as their main target. They signed him to a 3-year deal. You still have JSN. You ship off DK Metcalf. You say goodbye to Tyler Lockett. I think DK is definitely a little bit harder move just because of still, how young he is and, all the flashes he shows, but the consistency kind of always isn't there in Tyler Lockett. Father Time just hit him. It was the right move to move on, unfortunately, even though he's a legend. But they bring in an older guy in Cooper Kupp, which I think will be an interesting move because he was so good on the Rams, but did not have a great last year, was kind of bottom in the league in separation. Was that due to injuries? Maybe if he's fully healthy, can he be a solid wide receiver too? That'll be interesting to see, but obviously Jackson Smith and Jigba, just the stuff he provides and the leap he took in year 2 proved why, he was one of the first receivers taken in 2023 and why he's a stud. And then you also have Kenneth Walker in the backfield. That can be up and down for the most part, shows a lot of upside. And then you still have a great, defensive line with Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy looking to take another step in year 2. You have Devin Witherspoon, one of the best coverage cornerbacks last year as a rookie, Tariq Woolen. A lot of interesting piece on the defense, obviously coached by Mike McDonald, a defensive-minded guy. For me, though, I think the Seahawks are an underrated team because not a lot of people are picking them to win the division. I think that could be a sleeper mistake. And while you saw my power rankings yesterday, if anyone hasn't already watched that, check that out. I ranked the top 10 teams. Hey, next season, I do have the Rams, slightly win the division, but I think they're more of a playoff team, which is why I had them so high for as we started last year, taking the Eagles to the brink, destroying a 14-win Vikings team. They are a playoff team, but they also, regular season-wise might not be the best. Matthew Stafford's another year older. They kind of, not coast the regular season, but, they're not like a regular season built team. And I think the Seahawks are. Sam Darnold had an amazing year last year. And I think people will look at the Lions and playoff game against the Rams and say, he's going to go back to the old himself. And I think there's going to be some medium regression. I don't think he has the weapons he did with the Vikings, obviously, with Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson when he was back. You had Aaron Jones. There was a lot of great parts to that Vikings team. Kevin O'Connell, honestly, coaching him up. But there was plays where Darnold was just balling out himself. I remember, I go back to the game against his team now, the Seahawks, that game-winning drive where he steps up into the pocket, delivers a big-time throw to Jefferson. That wasn't coaching. That was him. The game against the Falcons, he was just scrambling around back there all day, finding, making plays. And he was doing that a lot during the season, using his legs when he need to. And he does take some bad sacks, Seahawks fans. You'll get used to that. But he still has a lot of high upside, and I'm expecting a good year from him. Not, the MVP level he played at last year, but a good year because he is a good quarterback, in my opinion, and will succeed because he has some good weapons here to work with. I think Cooper Kupp can bounce back, and, the offensive line, that'll be the biggest question mark because we saw when the Vikings, once Darisaw went down the interior, even though Darisaw's a tackle, he kind of helped carry that left side of the interior, and the whole interior collapsed those last few games. It wasn't all on Sam Darnold. Part of it was coaching. I think, the scheme, they were ride or die with the scheme, which was kind of a lot of long developing plays, which killed them. Darnold, most of it, was him holding on the ball too long, etc. But he still has a lot of great flashes. And I think that'll be the biggest question mark for the Seahawks, which is, can they protect Darnold, give him that 3 to 4 seconds? And hopefully that's something Sam Darnold can learn in OTAs and training camp, is just kind of how to avoid those awful sacks, because too many times last year, that's ultimately what killed them in those last 2 games, just taking awful sacks, especially that Rams game, getting sacked 9 times. But still, PFF rated him 82.7 last year as a quarterback. He was playing at top 10 level. The stats showed even MVP level. He'll have some picks in there, but he's a gunslinger. That's what he does. And overall, I'm excited to see the Seahawks team in year 2 with Mike McDonald. Always a consistent winning culture over there in Seattle, even though they didn't make the playoffs last year, still winning 9 games. I'm excited to see what they do this year. And then, with that being said, my final team, my third team, it's going to be a sleeper, I would say, because this is probably my biggest sleeper and probably biggest unlikely, make a surprise playoff run. But I really like what they did this offseason, and that is the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, kind of talking back to the Seahawks making that surprise trade for Geno Smith. I think the biggest surprise in coaching hire was the Raiders getting Pete Carroll. Just at his age, I thought he wouldn't come back into coaching, but he wants to. And him and Geno Smith worked really well together. Geno Smith is still a great quarterback, and the underlying metrics, I think, back up, he was playing better than even the stats showed, particularly in 2023. He would carry that Seahawks team while they did have some weapons. Lockett was still getting older, and Metcalf was good. JSN was still emerging, but he transformed JSN last year. The offensive line was never particularly great. He kind of overcame that. He made some gutsy throws and was, a big-time player for the Seahawks, making that Russell Wilson trade look like a huge win. He played at a high level those 3 years he was starting. But, I do think the Seahawks were looking for a change, someone younger like Darnold, because Geno Smith is on the older side. But the Raiders, they get an experienced guy that's been playing at a top 15 level these past 3 years quickly. And then you add that with GNT. I mean, I love the pick. He's just so exciting in college last year. 200 rushing plus yards, 200 rushing yards a game, basically. Second in Heisman voting behind Travis Hunter. The guy was just a beast. In my opinion, should have won Heisman. But, that's a debate we might do another day. But GNT, you got a special talent in the backfield already. He's going to be a big playmaker for them. You still have Jacoby Myers, Brock Bowers, that have one of the best rookie tight end seasons of all time, and is probably, in my opinion, already a top 2 tight end. Maybe I think he could emerge to number 1 this year, just given how Kelsey has kind of aged out, and then Kittle now turning 30, 31. I think he had a great year as well, so it might be 1 or 2, but I think Brock Bowers is ready to take that next step ahead of him. And then you still have some great defensive players, especially on the defensive line. Max Crosby, always been a beast. The Raiders paid him. Make sure you pay one of your best players. I'm expecting a big bounce back year from Christian Wilkins. That looked like a coveted signing last offseason. Didn't really quite work out the way most people expected last year, but I think he'll have a big bounce back year and go more back to that Dolphins player. And they just have a bunch of interesting pieces they signed. I think Devin White, he's shown flashes with Tampa Bay. Not the best coverage corner, but his coverage grade last year was actually 65 out of 189 linebackers. And just kind of using him in like blitz pickups, use athleticism in some ways, I think could be helpful. I think Pete Carroll will be able to use him the right way to get the job done. Jeremy Chin, that was always solid safety on Carolina. And then Eric Stokes, that actually was decently solid in Green Bay last year. I know he's been, more so a disappointment, but I think he can just provide a spark to the Raiders back end that can, come off, an improvement season last year with the Packers. So with that being said, yeah, Raiders, I think definitely the reason why it's the most, out of reach is just because how stacked that division is. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs are kind of in the middle of a dynasty. The Broncos were a playoff team last year that only got better. I mean, you have also the Los Angeles Chargers, another playoff team that, in my opinion, only got better, signing, Mekhi Becton and guys like that. And then also shout out the Broncos yesterday, because when we did the top 10 teams, I thought, the running back situation was a little bit, of a question mark. They signed J.K. Dobbins, who had a great year with the Chargers last year. So now it'll be him and R.J. Harvey, leading that backfield as a rookie, R.J. Harvey. So it'll be exciting. I think Sean Payton added another playmaker, especially stealing him in division where J.K. Dobbins was running over teams last year. And it was great to see him just as long as he stays healthy, because we know, injuries are kind of been his biggest downfall as a player in the league. But with that being said, next, before we talk quickly about, the Thunder Pacers game 3, just some interesting notes about, mandatory minicamp start for most teams yesterday. And we saw it for the Falcons. Kirk Cousins reported, despite wanting to be a trade. I always like Kirk, it's good here for the Vikings. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Is he okay now riding with backup? Does he still want the trade? It'll be interesting to see, kind of how that looks. Just in Atlanta, kind of such a big question mark last year, selling him to that 4-year deal. And I did think it was an overpay, but they can get out of it after this year, basically. So it'll just be interesting to see. But Kirk Cousins being 36, 37, do you kind of want to waste maybe one of his last years? just sitting as backup, or will they be able to find a trade and just kind of, the money situation? How much does Atlanta take versus the team that trades for him, and how much draft capital do they get back, if any? Just because last year was a disappointing year for Kirk Cousins. They started off good; they were 6-3, and then obviously the disappointment time to make the playoffs. He didn't throw a touchdown like 4 games, so stats didn't show it all, but he definitely looked like he was still recovering from that Achilles and wasn't comfortable, whatever, in Atlanta. And then with that being said, though, the biggest question mark for a team is the Cincinnati Bengals. And you go back just a couple of years ago where this team made the Super Bowl, made the AFC Championship again, right on the brink. It looked like they were on the verge of potentially winning a couple Super Bowls with Joe Burrow. But the cheap ownership has killed them. It took them forever to sign Jamar Chase. They probably could have signed him last offseason at discount. He ends up winning the Triple Crown. Should have been the Offensive Player of the Year. Or, well, Saquon Barkley was so good too. It doesn't really matter, but arguably an Offensive Player of the Year with that Triple Crown the historic season had. So they ended up having to pay more. Glad they got that done. They paid T. Higgins. And their offense will still be great, despite, still a leaky offensive line. Burrow will make it work with the talent he has at weapons, just like last year. But this defense, I mean, it was already bad. It got worse when Sam Hubbard retired. Now Trey Hendrickson's holding out, and now Steven, their first-round pick, is holding out. And it's just bad looks. And the reason why Steven is holding out, you may ask, is because of the contract situation where there's, they don't want to pay for injury guarantees, which is very, selfish of a team, especially with their first-round pick that, you want to win with now. And sorry, it was Samar Stewart. But he, was drafted first round, should get the injury guarantees like almost every other player does, but the Bengals are trying to avoid that. And it's just a bad look already. Like, even though he's still showing up, he's not practicing, which isn't good. You're missing reps. And then Trey Henderson, that's been the sack leader last year. Always been, consistent from making big time plays in the playoffs, getting those strip sacks, getting those sacks, timely sacks when needed. This defense is already bad. And it looks like it's going to get worse. They released their linebacker. I'm kind of stumbling on his name right now. I'm hoping the Vikings actually pick him up. But they, this defense is going to be leaky again. And this Bengals team, I just feel, is like their max is going to be like those 9, maybe 10 if everything goes right, because their defense is just going to be bottom of the league. The offense is going to have to bail them out. And Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins all had, especially specifically Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase had historic seasons last year, and they didn't even make the playoffs. They'll still be great, top 5 guys. But if they don't even have that historic season, are you looking at maybe a potentially 7-win team, 6-win team if this defense is even somehow worse? I know they got a new defensive coordinator, but I thought it wasn't even Lou Latterumo's fault for how bad his defense was. He tried to make, something out of poop shit, as I like to say. Apologies for my language. But, we'll see. It's just so disappointing to see. And I know Bengals fans must be frustrated with their owner, because it's truly disgusting to see, them not even want to pay their rookie. I mean, how many times has this happened? Like, rookie deals should be like this. I get it. The Jamar Chase, maybe the contract guarantees, you hold it up. And, it should have, they should have still signed him before the season, but maybe I understand why it takes longer. The rookies, there's no excuse for why it should be happening. But yeah, I mean, you never want to react in OTAs, but for the Bengals, obviously not off to a good start. And then you're just seeing, obviously, for a lot of teams, it'll be interesting to see, the quarterbacks, how they play out. Some new quarterbacks for me, the Vikings. It's great seeing JJ McCarthy already throw deep balls to Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson. So it's OTAs. Don't want to get too excited, but it's a sign. Like, man, football. I just want to start. I already want to draft my fantasy football teams. We'll do a fantasy episode coming up on who to draft, who to avoid, maybe. But with that being said, yeah. It should be exciting, just glad the teams are back out there and everyone's competing. And shout out the Jets, perfect attendance for mandatory OTAs. You'll have to see it, but, mandatory OTAs often is a mandatory for a lot of players, especially seeking new contracts. But with that being said, football, we'll keep you guys updated on any news that happens, God forbid, hopefully no injuries, but mandatory OTAs might expect a little ramp up, but hopefully, never want to see those. But with that being said, now we'll transition into tonight's basketball game. Obviously, just a quick preview. Game 3, Oklahoma City Thunder, Indiana Pacers. We are back in Indiana where one team's looking to take a 2-1 lead. Simple as that. And I think we talked about last time, my biggest key to the game is how aggressive is Tyrese Halliburton to start this game. They'll need him to assert his dominance. I know this Thunder team is historic, especially the defense is historically great, but we've seen at points teams be able to pick them apart. The Timberwolves did it for 2 games back at their crib. One game they won by 42. I know it's kind of an outlier, but teams can get hot shooting at home. And will Tyrese feel more comfortable with his home crowd? Can Nimhard, Neesmith, can they set tone Turner, Siakam, especially Siakam and Halliburton, because they're the two stars of the team that drives this fast-paced offense. It'll be interesting to see. And then on the Thunder side, Jalen Williams hasn't been that great, efficiency-wise. Is this a game that he can bounce back? How historic can SGA keep up his start to the finals? Like we said, the most points through 2 games for a player's first NBA finals, or might be even like through it the most with Allen Iverson, but I think the first, at least 100% certain on that. So, this game will be exciting. I'm expecting a much closer game just because Indiana's back home, but OKC, is never obviously going to go down without a fight. They're a 68-win team, tied for best net rating with the 96 Bulls for a reason, but should be exciting. If I had to do a game pick tonight, I'm feeling Thunder close game, like a 5 to 7 point win. I think it's going to be fun, but I ultimately have OKC winning tonight. Don't bet money on it, but it should be a good one. And hopefully, we got a good game, because who doesn't like a close game, especially if you're not a fan of these two teams. If you're a fan, you obviously want your team to win by 40 and stress-free, but that's no fun for us. But with that being said, it should be exciting to recap that game tomorrow. But with that being said, as always, make sure to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments, what you're looking most forward to with your team and OTAs, any exciting news, or the 3 sleepers. Do you agree with my 3 sleepers? Disagree? Who did I leave off this list that you would potentially, like to see on? And also comment, who you think will win tonight, Game 3 NBA. But with that being said, as always, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.